Hello, welcome to another edition of North Coast History and Haunts. Today's episode focuses on the disappearance of Beverly Potts. Beverly was a child and lived on Lynette Avenue here in Cleveland, Ohio. She came to this park with a friend to enjoy a festival, a carnival that was being presented for the neighborhood children. It was here where she disappeared. Could this park still hold additional clues about the disappearance of Beverly? Let's find out. In 1951, the innocence of this western Cleveland suburb was gone, stolen by the tragedy of a young girl who vanished away into the night. This is the story of Beverly Potts. 10-year-old Beverly Potts disappeared on August 24th, 1951. She lived on Lynette Avenue with her parents, Robert and Elizabeth Potts, and their 22-year-old daughter, Anita. Next door lived Beverly's best friend, Patsy Swing. On this fateful day, they were going to Halloran Park. It was a neighborhood park which opened in 1945. On this special day, a traveling show was in town called Show Wagon, which featured singers and dancers from area high schools. Beverly was known to be looking forward to this and was excited to go with her friend. Halloran Park at night was a dark, desolate place where vagrants often frequented. It wasn't uncommon to find wine bottles and trash left there overnight. The tall trees obscured a lot of the streetlights, and Halloran Park is much the same today. Beverly and her friend decided to go to the park on their bikes. When they got there, they found the park was extremely crowded. Some estimated the crowd at over 1,500 people. They realized they couldn't maneuver through the crowd like they wanted to, so they decided to return home and drop their bikes off. When they did this, Patsy's mother tried to tell her not to go back, but she said, well, wait a minute. Beverly's parents said she could go back, and Patsy's mother relented. And there was no way anybody could know that this small decision would forever alter both families' lives. So the girls returned back to the now very crowded park. They made their way to the stage, and over time, Patsy began to grow worried because she had given her parents her word that she would be back for her 8:30 curfew. She implored Beverly to go with her, but Beverly relented, saying she wanted to stay and see the rest of the show. Patsy explained to her that she had this curfew and Beverly should go with her. Beverly informed her that her parents had allowed her to stay out and enjoy the whole show. In fact, she said she even reminded Beverly that Beverly had gotten punished for being late, and this was a bad habit of an otherwise fantastic young lady. So she's trying to implore Beverly to go home, saying, hey, I made a promise to my parents that I would be home by 8:30. And Beverly wanted to stay, and she insisted and said, well, my parents said I could stay until the show was finished, and she refused to go. Patsy was a little upset by this, but Patsy made her way back without Beverly, and this was the last time anybody would see Beverly alive. So Patsy went back home, and her parents assumed that Beverly was with her, and Beverly's parents assumed that she was still over at Patsy's house. Well, of course, none of that proved to be true, and no short order, Beverly's parents became very upset and very worried, So they went down to the park. Anita and her dad went and searched Halloran Park at around 10 o'clock at night. They obviously didn't find her, no sign of her whatsoever, so they decided to come back and came back home and called the police at 11 o'clock. For some reason, the police don't show up until 12:30 at night. Well, by this time, the family was sick with worry to the point where they had called the police 4 separate times. So immediately after that, word spread throughout the whole community that the Beverly Potts girl had not returned home after having been up at Halloran Park. The neighbors gathered together in groups and began searching the neighborhood, canvassing almost door by door, desperately searching for any sign of Beverly. And they searched all night. They searched in the morning along with the police, and nobody had found her. It was as if she had vanished into thin air. Reports began to flood in to the police, and it instantly became a circus. Instantly. They called it the largest search in Cleveland history up to that point. The police and the newspaper were desperate for any leads, and they said that the newspaper essentially set up camp in front of the Potts residence, and overnight their private lives were just exposed for anybody to see. The family was cleared simply because they were all there watching a baseball game that night, but neighbors began to whisper that perhaps they knew something that they weren't telling. Some tips came in. Sometimes it involved the black Dodge Coupe 1937 model that was said to have pulled into Halloran Park. They reported that they saw Beverly playing around it, but nobody remembers her being seen getting into the car. There was a 13-year-old boy who lived in the neighborhood. He was a newspaper delivery boy, and he had seen Beverly, and he knew it was her by recognizing her from the neighborhood, but also by her distinctive duck-like walk. So he had passed her up on his way back home. The search instantly spread. They immediately didn't find Beverly, so they instantly canvassed the neighborhood. They searched vacant lots, suspicious cars. They even went door to door. The newspaper had, again, every day, this was in the headlines of the local paper that nobody could find or knew what had happened. But most people agreed it was probably somebody she knew. No instant viable suspects were ever found. A couple suspects that they had brought in, there was a guy by the name of Harvey Lee Rush. He was incarcerated in California, and he confessed to it just so he could get a ride back to Cleveland, be extradited back to Cleveland. There was a guy named William Henry Redmond that a lot of people seem to point their fingers at. He was a Ferris wheel operator in Pennsylvania and Ohio, and he was convicted of killing an 8-year-old girl in 1951 in Pennsylvania. But no evidence existed to link him to any of the crimes. So, despite everybody's best efforts, Beverly Potts was never seen or heard from again. Many people think that it had to be somebody she knows, somebody from the neighborhood. Whispering began, and the innocence of the community was lost forever. Over time, different theories and conjectures began being whispered about from neighbor to neighbor. The police considered an active investigation, and in 1994, a letter was discovered under a carpet in a home in Cleveland nearby. It said that a woman supposedly had written this letter, and she had witnessed her husband disposing of Beverly's body in the furnace, but I believe that was found to be proven false. In 2001, the Plain Dealer, a local newspaper, received a series of letters from an anonymous source stating that the person was sick and they didn't have much time left and they wanted to confess to their crime, so they agreed to meet in 2001 on August 24th, which would have been 50-year anniversary at Halloran Park, and to no one's surprise, nobody ever showed up. The police consider this an ongoing investigation. If you have any clues or tips that would help police solve this crime, please report them to Cleveland Crime Stoppers at the following number. Thanks for watching.